Well, U.S. lawmakers are meeting to discuss an unconventional way of avoiding yet another partial federal government shutdown. Less than 2 months ago, they avoided a shutdown at the 11th hour amid a Republican rebellion. The stopgap kept the government funded, but only until November 17th. It cost the previous House Speaker his job. Owen Fairclough brings us up to date.
If you've been following US government dysfunction in recent times, you may be familiar with the term continuing resolution. That's the measure that lawmakers use to keep the federal government funded in the short term and avoid a shutdown of government agencies, also known as kicking the can down the road. Now enter the public lexicon, the laddered continuing resolution. That's kicking one can down the road for now and then another for a later date. And that's the strategy of the new Republican Speaker of the lower House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, to appease a hardline faction of ultra-conservative lawmakers who are deeply opposed to continuing resolutions. They want a permanent fix and a permanent long-term strategy to cut funding for some government agencies and essentially shrink the size of the US government. Around 6 weeks ago, lawmakers used a continuing resolution to keep the government funded to this point, but it cost the previous Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, his job with those hardline conservatives. And Johnson needs them on board, otherwise he has to rely on Democrat votes, and many Democrats are opposed to the idea of a continuing resolution. All of this matters because credit rating agencies are starting to get nervous about the US and these intractable problems, the inability of lawmakers to find long-term budget solutions to keep the government funded. And they're concerned that this will threaten the US economy as one of the world's surest, and its reputation with the dollar, the world's reserve currency. It's all linked. But there are bigger problems beyond these lawmakers and indeed these continuing resolutions, namely growing ideological opposition on both sides of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to the US providing billions of dollars in financial and military aid to both Ukraine and Israel, but for different reasons. And these constant arguments over continuing resolutions or laddered continuing resolutions are unlikely to paper over these cracks and these growing ideological positions over the US funding these conflicts. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Okay, for more on the potential government shutdown, let's bring in John Quelch, professor at the Miami Herbert Business School. Welcome back, John. Always a pleasure to see you. Let's start by talking about this. This is really the first test for this new House Speaker. His first foray into resolving this mess seemingly didn't go too smoothly. What can you tell us about that, how it played out over the weekend, how he wanted to kind of have two ends of the finish line, if you will, for the near future?
So the hard-right Republicans in particular have long been upset by the omnibus continuing resolution, to use the term that Owen defined in his package. And what the new Speaker has done is to split all of the resolutions that are involved in the continuing resolution into two packages. One that would continue through January, and a second one that would continue the government operations of those departments through February. This is a mechanism by which the Speaker, the new Speaker, can avoid being tagged with following exactly the same process that his predecessor, who then was ousted, followed a month or so ago. And as a result of that, I think what we're going to see is, I would put a percentage of, say, 60% on this going through in some form or another, and 40% percentage on a shutdown at this point. I think that there is a strong mood to give the new Speaker a fair chance. And I think that although there may be some hard-right Republicans who will not be able to vote for it, there will be Democratic support.
And John, Moody's on Friday changed the credit rating of the U.S. government to negative from stable, in part not just over the concern about a possible government shutdown, but also due to the severe political polarization. What does that tell the world?
Well, the cumulative deficit that we are incurring, and that has doubled in really the last decade, is such a weight on the currency that there is, I think, increasing concern that over time the dollar is not going to be able to sustain its very important reserve currency status. And I think not enough lawmakers and members of the public understand just how many benefits accrue to the U.S. economy as a result of most of the world's debt being dollar denominated. So this cumulative deficit issue is a very severe issue. And as you also imply, Sean, the sausage-making process by which the budget is handled in the U.S. House of Representatives is a cause for concern. There are very few nations which see this kind of charade occurring every 6 weeks or so as part of their administrative procedures. And accordingly, Moody's has now joined Fitch and S&P in kicking the dollar in the groin, giving it a good solid message of dissatisfaction.
John, you're exactly right. And your thoughts on the possibility of a rolling or staggered shutdown, and especially during big holiday times in the United States when these lawmakers scatter to the wind?
Well, that's one reason why the Speaker's suggestion of a continuing resolution that's split into two, with one group of departments being funded through January and a second group being funded through February, that's another reason why this actually does stand a chance. And it's interesting to note that the White House and leaders on the Democratic side in the U.S. Senate, which of course also has to agree to the House, agree with the House on a budget, they have not been immediately dismissive of the idea. So I think that augurs well for something coming through the pipeline by Friday evening, which is, of course, the deadline.
Okay, John Quelch, a real pleasure. And again, you say 60% chance that the United States will avoid the shutdown, 40% chance that it will.